By now you've been brought up to the date with the salient financial aspects of the budget and how funds are going to be collected and distributed. In this segment, I would like to unpack how the budget impacts on you, the individual. We were astounded that the budget was better than expected. To summarise, no fuel levy, no increase in VAT, brief comments on NHI, no increase at all on the rebates allowed for medical, nor primary, secondary or tertiary rebates. Tax thresholds remain the same. Increase in tax if you're a smoker and drinker. And joining this evening is Harry Joffe, Head Legal Services Discovery Life, and Tony Davey, Chartered Tax Advisor and Advocate at Tony Davey Associates. Well, opening up the show to you, Tony, very simply, unsurprisingly, I mean, there was all rumours that's going to increase and all different things, but really a non-event.
Agreed. No changes.
Okay, guys, we finished with the program. Harry, you never came in a blue and shirt. I told you to. Okay.
Keep it short. Blue. Keep it short and sweet. But no changes to tax rates and no changes to rebates. The economic effect of that, of course, is that there's been no inflation adjustment for what we call bracket creep. So because of inflation, which is say 5-6%, you may have, for example, had your salary adjusted by that amount, which might therefore put you into a higher tax bracket than you were. So you may in fact end up paying more tax because there hasn't been an adjustment to the tax tables to take inflation into account.
It's quite unusual because in all the years that I can remember, there's always been that tax adjustment.
I think I've done it once before, Brian, a couple of years ago.
There is one precedent, but it is unusual. So in a sense, you are paying more tax.
Harry, one of the big things that the market's been waiting for, those in retirement funds have been waiting for, is the two-pot system, which is surprising. You know, when I think about the two-pot system, the only people who contribute to pension funds and provident funds and probably can afford to contribute to single retirement annuities are those people who are working and can put bread on the table.
Yep.
And those workers are struggling to make ends meet. But we've been waiting for this two-pot system now for 2 years. There was hope that it would come in on the 1st of March. It's now been extended to the 1st of September. Just unpack for us this two-pot system, what it means, who it's going to affect and what's going to happen.
So Brian, I think let's just be blunt. We're very grateful it didn't come in on the 1st of March because no insurance company would have been ready. It's a lot of systems work, as you can imagine, because it's actually three-pot. It's not two-pot because there's the vested pot, which is all the old stuff prior to 1 September, and then there's the two pots after 1 September. So you can imagine the systems work our poor systems guys have to do to now have on one schedule, because remember it's one fund, to have all these different subsections and the vested pot under one set of rules, the savings pot under another, the retirement under another. So let's just unpack.
And the rules still have to be registered.
Exactly, of each pension fund.
So I mean,
exactly.
You know, that's still going to go through the FSB and the pension fund.
Right. I mean, I think just to understand, Treasury, and it's what you've said, Treasury were in a very difficult position. You've got all these employed workers who are, as you say, battling to make ends meet. Under COVID, some of them weren't getting paid, but they were still employed. And they couldn't access any money in their retirement funds unless they resigned their jobs. So now what the Treasury is trying to do is trying to walk a balance. I'm sure Tony will comment just now whether he thinks they have walked the right balance. But the balance they're trying to walk is to give them some access to some money, but the bulk of the money now they can't ever touch. And that's why we talk about three pots. So the vested pot, all your money in your funds prior to 1 September stays as is. So that vested pot, current rules will remain, and that's why no one must panic. People shouldn't resign their jobs to try and access that fund, because that stays under the old rules. Then from 1 September, your contribution split two ways, 1/3 into a savings pot, 2/3 into a retirement pot. The savings pot you can access without having to resign your job. You're always able to access it, as long as you're accessing at least 2,000 Rand in that tax year. Your tax...
With a maximum?
There's no maximum.
30,000?
No, that's the seed capital. I'll come to that now.
Okay.
So you can cash in whatever you want in the savings pot, but you are taxed at marginal rates, which is a new thing for us. So it's not on the withdrawal tables like currently. You tax at your full marginal rate. Then your retirement pot, that is kind of similar to the current law, where you can't access your retirement pot at all now. Even if you resign your job, you can't access that retirement pot, and that you'll have to wait to retire and you'll get paid an annuity. You can only access it, just to complete it, if you die, of course. You won't be accessing, but your family will. if there's a divorce, your ex-spouse can still have a claim against it. And of course, if you tax immigrant and you're not tax resident for 3 consecutive years. But short of those 3 outliers, you can't access your retirement fund, your retirement fund. So then back to what you said, the vested pot. So the vested pot remains under the old rules, which means theoretically you can't access any money. And then there was a big to and fro, you remember this in the news, between government and the labour unions, who said they need to access some money because it's going to take their people too long to build up sufficient capital in their savings pot for it to help them. And now the compromise was the seed capital provision, where on 1 September, the lesser of 10% or 30,000 in your vested pot, so for most people it would be 30,000, will move from the vested to the savings pot, and you'll be able to access that immediately.
Tony, that 30,000, that's before tax.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
So you're now going to pay. You're now going to pay. It's going to be added to your current income, and you're going to be paying at the top rate at your marginal rate.
It's definitely tax inefficient because you're going to pay your marginal rate, which is anything from 18 to 45. But the reality is, I suppose, I think Harry will agree, that most persons who will be accessing this one-off withdrawal would tend to be in the lower tax bracket because they need the money.
Tony?
Brian, sorry, one interesting point, and it came up in the budget. It just tucked away there in one of their budget figures. They expect so many people to cash in from the 1st of September. They expect to raise 5 billion rand in taxes for this tax year. Because everyone cashing in.
So what if Tony's working on 18%, he's saying most people 18 to 20%, you were talking about a cashing in of 25 billion rand.
Something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
Tony, so let's now talk ahead. I mean, because only a few percent of South Africans can retire comfortably. So let's talk about what the impact is on individuals who I know may need the money now, but how's that going to ultimately impact on their retirement? And isn't this going to put more of a burden on the state later on in life?
Well, yes, that is so. Okay. I think bear in mind though, as Harry said, you've got the vested pot which is there, which is other than the maximum 30,000 one-off withdrawal. The future contributions, 1/3 goes to the savings pot, so to speak, and 2/3 goes to the retirement pot. It's only that 1/3 plus growth thereon, which can be accessed annually. So it's not free for all access to your full 3/3 retirement fund, so to speak. It's only an access to 1/3. And if that's what keeps people employed and saves them from having to resign in order to access it, I think it's a price worth paying.
And that's the point, Brian. I mean, as Tony is saying, you could always resign your job and access 3/3 under current law. So in effect, they've made it easier and harder because at 2/3 now you can't access unless you get divorced or tax immigrate. So the 2/3 is now actually better protected than it was before, even though the 1/3 is not. So it's a weird.
So Harry, are you saying that you're now forced, you can no longer take out money when you withdraw, when you resign, because you spoke about death, that what you can do, but now when you resign, you're actually going to be having to preserve the monies?
Yeah, so your 1/3 in your savings you can of course access, your 2/3 in your retirement pot, you'll have to move over either to your new employer's retirement pot, or if you don't go to a new employer, you'll have to preserve it somehow.
I think that's understood.
Yeah,
because some years ago, when the pension reform was all about, there was enormous upheaval about the fact that you could not, you had to preserve your withdrawal benefit.
So I think it is understood because in the sense that hasn't really changed, because if you now move jobs, you would have to cash it in before you moved. So I think that hasn't really changed. I mean, it's just the 1/3 which is always accessible.
And Tony, you could take 30,000 every year if there's enough in that portion.
Correct. Again, it depends on whatever that 1/3 is plus growth of those contributions. You can take that full amount.
We talk about someone who's someone's been working for 20 years for a company.
Yes.
The 1/3 is likely to be a lot more than 300,000, and then 10% of the 300,000 is 30. Yes. It could be as much as 600,000 or 800,000.
Brown, let's clarify this. Going forward, that one-off, that 30,000
is a one-off. Okay. And then
it is your future contributions.
Okay.
1/3 of that plus growth can be accessed each year.
Employers are going to be asked, many employers will ask employers, is this advisable? They're going to have to be a bit schooled in this to advise, employees, is there nothing else you can do than going in? Because as you say, if someone at a 40% tax rate is going to take 30,000 one off and they're going to pay 12,000 Rand in tax.
Brian, the cherry is if you don't cash in your savings pot and you wait till retirement, that savings pot, you can draw the lump sum and you qualify for the 550 tax-free amount still. So there's an incentive not to cash in your savings.
Okay, what if you don't want that? Because will the investment strategy on that 1/3, that cash, is it going to be different to the investment strategy of the rest of the
That's a question we've been asked. We actually had a client ask us, can he not put any money in the savings pot?
Yes.
Because he's worried about that. And the answer is no, you have to go 1/3, 2/3.
So then, obviously, the
We haven't been told that there's going to be any difference at the moment. I mean, the underlying sub-funds haven't changed for your retirement funds at the moment.
Okay. Harry, you must be very pleased that the fear that medical tax credits would maybe be done away with to help fund NHR. We didn't hear too much about NHR, although a certain amount of money has been set aside. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, so as Tony said, they didn't increase the medical tax credit.
They didn't take it away either.
Yeah, they didn't take it away, they didn't increase it. Just by not increasing it, they raised over R1 billion, just by keeping it constant without the inflation indexing. The second point, we've done a lot of research at Discovery, and if they were to take away those medical tax credits in their entirety, over 1 million people potentially are going to leave the medical aid. That's how many people rely on the tax credit to almost fund their contributions. And we've actually put that into the press a couple of times. So I think they're quite cautious, and they should be, before they remove that tax credit totally.
Tony, I don't know if you've picked up anything on grants. Are they increasing pensions? Are they social grants? And
yeah, the main grant, let me call it the old age grant, that's gone up by 100 Rand. Okay.
That's less than 5%.
Yes,
5%.
Sure. So that's 100 Rand. It's going to be 90 Rand, I think, from April, and then 10 Rand in October or something. So that's gone up 100. And, smaller grants like for fostering is 50 Rand a month increase. But social distress relief, sort of like the COVID one of 350. Yeah, that's the same, but it is under review.
Okay. And then, Harry, let me ask you this question. And maybe because there's not that much to talk about it, but things happen during the course of the year that many of our viewers are not always aware of. Harry, let me put this question to you, then I'm going to ask Tony. South Africans have been quite delinquent with the trusts. You pick a friend, a couple of you make decisions, as compared to international trusts. Yeah. After grey listing, I think the regulations, or the regulators started to look a lot more carefully, and people have to be very careful now, one, about forming a trust, and two, those that have a trust, understanding what they can do and what they can't do.
So, Brian, we've got a few minutes. I'll just tell you a story that's happened to me. So I'm only a trustee on one trust. I'm not a trustee on anything else. It's a charitable trust for an old deceased colleague of mine. And it was me and another lawyer and one of the parents. And up until now, we've run it beautifully and cleanly. It's not a lot of money in the trust. It's about 1.5 million. It's really small money for the minor child. Now, from, of course, all the new rules which we've spoken about a lot on the show, we've had to, of course, register with SARS. We've had to register with the master. We've had to bring in an accountant to do financials. It's cost us quite a bit of money just to get up to speed. And then, of course, we found out there are all these back taxes that we owed because we hadn't registered, even though there's no taxable income in the trust, but there was a little bit of interest. So, that's the first thing. We have to now do everything properly because there's a 10 million Rand fine, which our insurance won't cover. So we've done that part. But the second thing, which now, and this is where South Africans are very delinquent, is with trust resolutions. No one ever does trust resolutions. You kind of just do what you need to do in the trust and you don't pass the resolution in time. And of course that meant for the last tax year, we couldn't make the distribution through to the minor child to pass the tax down to the minor child. We are stuck with the trust having to pay the tax. And that, of course, as Tony has already spoken about tax rates, it's much higher in the trust than it is for a minor child. The trust pays at the flat rate of 45%, and the minor child would have been at 18%, if that. So that's a very important point. Your resolutions now must be done. And it's funny, of course, we've got a week left of this tax year. Anyone wanting to make trust distributions down to beneficiaries now must pass those resolutions now. Don't wait till after the tax year, because then, of course, it's too late. Think who you want to make a distribution to, who you want to pay the tax in your trust. Of course, assuming Section 7 and all of that doesn't overrule it. But then just do that distribution now so you can make and do that resolution so you can make that distribution in time. That's really important for me.
Tony, do all trusts now have to be tax registered and actually do accounts?
Yes, you do have to register as a taxpayer. And even if it's a nil return, you still got to submit a return.
So if a trust holds a property?
Yes.
Still got to get it. And then, Tony, let's talk about beneficial owner and the responsibilities and what trustees or what has to be done in providing the regulators with the relevant information. And if you don't, you can get a big fine.
Yeah. Brian, that's actually part of our anti-money laundering laws and anti-terrorist funding laws. And it's known as FICIA, Financial Intelligence Centre, FIC Act. And basically, there's been an emphasis on transparency, particularly with trusts, because of our grey listing. And the whole point is you've got to know your client. So trustees are now required to register. This is in terms of laws passed in 2022, a General Laws Amendment Act on anti-money laundering, through the portal at the Master's office. So it's an electronic online system. You have to notify the Master's office, effectively on behalf of the FIC regulator, of what's called beneficial ownership to the trust fund. So this is not only trustees who are technically the owners, although not beneficially. They are the owners in title only. All beneficiaries of the trust. So the details of the beneficiaries, who they are, where they are, etc., must be provided to the master. And this ensures, again, transparency and stops trust being used as fronting for possibly illegal purposes, and all that registered with the master. So it's the concept of beneficial ownership. It's a big debate amongst trust practitioners because they say if you're a beneficiary of a trust, which is what's called a discretionary trust, in other words, the trustees have the discretion whether to award you anything or not, you don't have any rights, so how can you be considered as a beneficial owner? But one just has to accept this as a fiction for the purposes of our anti-money laundering laws. So the point is you've got to give all that information through to the Master's office. And in the absence of that, you're in for heavy fines, which I think my last recall is about up to 10 million.
That's what Harry said, yeah. Tony, so hold on. So if a trust says children, grandchildren, grandchildren to be born?
Well, yep. I think you can only realistically work on persons who are
but if you've got
alive.
You've got children all over the world. You've got grandchildren all over the world. You have to get all the details of those.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, our trust that I'm talking about for me, we've got one asset in the trust, which of course is an endowment policy, which I've arranged. So there shouldn't be any major tax in the trust. We keep a small bank account of a couple of $1,000 just to pay any expenses, and we were hit now with a tax bill and the accountant's bill for the financials and for doing what Tony said, they're registering with the master and SARS of over 25,000 Rand. And it's a simple trust with one minor kid and one endowment policy.
Who's being fined? You as trustees?
No, we weren't fined. We just had to pay the tax and a couple of back
And
taxes.
if you were fined, who would be fined? The trustees?
Trustees would be fined, yes.
So who would want to be a trustee?
No one.
But you're staying on as a trustee, Harry?
Well, it's just an obligation to
understand.
It's one trust.
That's what happens. You become obligated to someone to tell. It's very difficult.
And we're not charging a fee for being a trustee, I can tell you that.
And no professional indemnity insurance, anything like that.
But won't cover if you commit a criminal offence. I mean, nothing's going to cover you for that. So that's the
So Harry, so let's just quickly, I don't want to leave the show saying, today's the 21st, 8 more days, and not even 8 more days because some of the companies closed their books earlier.
Yes.
What can we still do? I mean, there's ways of saving tax through
obviously an RA. I mean, you got to the 28 to top up your RA, to the 27.5% or the 350, whichever is the lower. So you can do the top up to the RA. Secondly, of course, is a contribution to a tax-free savings account, the 36,000 Rand, which everyone should make an allocation.
Which is different because the RA contribution is tax deductible.
The tax-free savings is not.
Tax-free savings is after tax money, yeah?
And the tax-free savings, of course, is estate dutable when you die, where the RA isn't generally, of course, as long as there's no non-deductible contributions. Then a couple of other things. I mean, our viewers are very charitable. So, you can contribute up to 10% of your taxable income as a tax deduction to the 18A institution. So if you're going to make a contribution to a charity, do it this week. and make sure it's an 18A registered institution, so you get your tax certificate. If you're buying capital expenditure, which is deductible, say you're in your own business and you're buying a laptop, and you can write those off in terms of the write-off periods, do it now and this week. And then, of course, to me, the most important one is that 100,000 Rand annual donations exemption. As you know, you're allowed to donate up to 100,000 Rand per tax year free of donations tax, not tax deductible, but free of donations tax. So everyone with an estate duty problem or trying to do some basic estate planning should donate the 100,000 Rand either to a child or to a trust, if they've got a trust, even better. And then, of course, Brian, the trust, in turn, should use that money to buy an endowment policy so there's no tax in the trust that they have to pay.
Okay, so you need to talk to your advisor. Tony, Harry made the note, the thing about being a trustee. Now, you've been in trust planning, trust advice for years. Are a lot of your trustees from those various trusts resigning?
You're finding that, and also persons are re-examining if they truly need a trust or not. Trusts used to be very tax-driven. They were formed because historically there were tax advantages, and also because it was an estate freezing, in other words, reduction of estate duty. You've got to re-examine your reasons for having a trust. There are very cogent reasons for having a trust. If you're looking at asset protection, for example, minor children, disabled persons, it's persons who can't manage their financial affairs. Very good reasons for asset protection. But if it's a tax-driven only type of trust, I suggest you revisit whether you should not consider just winding it up.
But then what happens is you bring the whole asset into your estate, and you've got to think about estate duty.
Yes, no, I mean, I accept that, but you may have other, for example, children who are closer to, not as close to the finishing line of life, you might say, and you could have the distribution of assets to younger persons. It doesn't have to come to you.
Look, I think what's important, Tony, and we've certainly give your details out. I mean, that's what your best practice is about, advising. When do you when do you actually terminate a trust? How do you restructure? And so many people have got trusts they've never even looked at,
and have got no real purpose in having the trust. I mean, for a lot of people, to be honest, and it's exactly what Tony's saying. If you've just taken it out to avoid estate duty, you've got no other reason but to avoid estate duty. You might find it much cheaper to just take a simple insurance policy, which just pay the premium on that policy to cover the duty and not have the cost of a trust and the trustee and the tax returns and the financials. I'm not saying you're always going to do that, but I'm saying that's what Tony's saying. Reevaluate, is this trust making sense financially? Is there a better or cheaper way of achieving what you want to achieve?
Because the other advantage is you can distribute and attribute income to all your children, and you reduce the taxes.
Accept that, but if they'd held in their own name, it would have been the same result.
And
Brian, you had all the anti-avoidance stuff, the Section 7, which gets thrown at you, and the GAR, and all of that. So it's not so simple anymore.
And attribution, what you're really doing is attributing, and you're putting the assets back into their names anyway. So you're creating that situation.
And if you've got loan accounts, you've got all the Section 7.
Tony, with SARS now dealing with the offshore allowances.
All right, the 1 million and the 10 million.
Is this now become a problem?
All right, look, the 1 million is automatic in the sense you're entitled to that, and that doesn't require. You go to your bank, you fill in usually a one-page form, and it gets transferred. There's no SARS approval required for the 1 million. That's the so-called foreign discretionary allowance. It used to be the old travel allowance. The 10 million, okay, which is the foreign investment allowance, usually triggers a SARS audit as to primarily the source of funds. So it is, there's a very lengthy, kind of quite complex form, okay, called the ART form. It's the Approved International Transfer Form, which needs SARS approval, and it can be very invasive. If, for example, you've just sold a house, for example, and cashed an investment, that's easy. But if it's accumulated savings, it could trigger an audit historically as to how you accumulated this and to make sure, in fact, that it is post-tax monies. So it can be invasive.
Well, we've run out of time, but other than everyone paying a little more tax, not in rands, but because of no inflation adjustments, everyone will be paying between 4 to 6% this year. I would like to thank Tony and Harry for joining me this evening. Guys, thanks for going for us. See you soon again. Thank you for watching. Take care.